I wonder if you're one of those people who loves 2-for-1 offers. When you go around the supermarket, or perhaps these days when you're shopping online for your groceries, do you look out for those kind of offers? They seem to be everywhere now, 2-for-1 or buy one, get one free or something like that. The problem with them is that we end up, particularly when it comes to food, with too much food. And then we have two options. We either eat all of that food or we throw it away as waste. Looking at me this morning, you can probably gather what we do more often than not. But too many of us waste those things that we think we've saved by buying a 2-for-1 offer or a buy one, get one free offer. The local government association estimates that 2-for-1, just 2-for-1 offers, those kind of buy one, get one free offers, create £13.7 billion worth of wasted food every year. That's mountains and mountains of wasted fresh produce. Because of these offers, we end up buying too much fresh food and then we end up throwing it away because we don't get a chance to eat it before it goes off. This is what Councillor Clyde Lokes of the LGA's Environment Board said once. With more than 5 million tonnes of edible food thrown out each year, way too much food is being brought into homes in the first place. Retailers need to take a large slice of responsibility for that. Buy one, get one free deals, which give consumers a few days to munch through 16 clementines, are not about providing value for money. So what is it that you do with what you think you've saved when you go for a 2-for-1 offer? Do you use it or do you end up wasting it? You may come away from the supermarket or having clicked online thinking that you've got yourself a great bargain. I've got twice as much as I thought I was going to buy here for the same price. But what do you do with what you've saved? I think that's a really good question to ask ourselves on Remembrance Sunday. This year in particular, 2020, we've celebrated and commemorated the 75th anniversary of VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, and VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day, the end of the Second World War. Those commemorations took place in what is now the first lockdown, and there were many documentaries and newspaper articles and concerts and online religious services marking those occasions. And it brought to mind again the human cost of the Second World War and the other conflicts that we mark today. You may remember way back in 2014 now, it doesn't seem that it was that far away, but there was an art installation put in outside the Tower of London called Blood, Sweat, Lands and Seas of Red. There's a photograph of it on your screen at the moment. It was a beautiful and poignant art installation. It was the brainchild of artists Paul Cummins and Tom Piper. And the installation is made up of 888,246 ceramic poppies, each one representing a British military fatality during the First World War. Those of us who were lucky enough to go and visit the Tower of London and to see this art installation, it brought home the magnitude of the sacrifice that was made on our behalf. Those 888,246 military men and women and the 667 lives that were given in the Second World War, and over 4,000 military men and women who've given their lives since those wars, died defending our freedom. And the question we have to ask ourselves today is, what are we doing with what was saved by those sacrifices? What have we done with what they defended in their struggles and in their suffering, in their courage and in their loss? Our passage from Matthew chapter 25 this morning is Jesus' story of a rich and powerful man who entrusts property to 3 of his slaves while he goes on a journey. Literally, each one of them receives a huge fortune into their hands. And as we learned, as we heard those verses a little earlier, two of his servants went off and put the money to work and made money, made substantial profits when their master returned. Look what Jesus says the master says to the first servant in verse 21. The master was full of praise. "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." He had a similar conversation with the second servant. But the third servant, who was afraid of his master, simply buried the money that had been entrusted to him. He didn't actually lose any of it, but he also didn't gain anything from what was given to him either. And it's that reason why the master reacts so angrily towards that third slave. Verses 26 to 30 say, "But the master replied, 'You wicked and lazy servant, if you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it.' Then he ordered, 'Take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.'" Jesus says something had to be done with the treasure that he was given. The other two did just that. They put the treasure to work, and it developed and it grew within their talents and their gifts and abilities, but it developed and grew. And they were commended for being good and trustworthy servants of the master. The third was condemned simply because he buried what was entrusted to him. He allowed no chance for the treasure he had to be used. Those who have died for our freedom in 2 world wars and other conflicts have entrusted us with that treasure. And the question is, what have we done with what they saved? Have we used it, or have we buried it? When Sir Winston Churchill became our wartime Prime Minister in 1940, he said that Britain and the Allies were to wage war by sea, land and air with all our might and with all the strength that God can give us, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark, lamentable catalogue of human crime. Whether deliberate or otherwise, those words echo St. Paul, who in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, reminds us that we are engaged in spiritual warfare every day. He says, "For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places." Hitler warped and twisted political power and institutions until they carried out huge acts of pure evil. He corrupted everything. Ephesians reminds us that such corruption and hatred is an ever-present threat. And the news today tells us that much too. Today we honour those who fought against such depravity and bitterness, but as we honour them, the question remains, what have we done with what they have saved? This country has been taken to the brink on at least 2 occasions in the past 100 years or so. People knew what was at risk in those 2 world wars. Our very way of life was at risk. Our freedoms were at risk. And by the end of those 2 world wars, we were painfully aware of the huge cost that it took to overcome that risk. We saved our freedom, but we cannot forget the price that we paid for it. I wonder, do we ever take our freedom for granted? Has our relative prosperity today in 2020 made us forget what was sacrificed for it? We often criticize our politicians, forgetting that others fought for us to retain the open political system that we enjoy today. We sometimes moan that things aren't the way that they used to be or the way that they should be, but then do we ever do anything to change those things for the better? Our market economy convinces us that everything comes down to a price and that individuals don't have an intrinsic value of their own. People seem to live for themselves and have little regard for others. Sometimes it feels as if everywhere community is breaking down. Jesus told his story of the master and the three servants to denounce the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious leaders of his day. They were guilty of taking the law of Moses, the temple, the sign of God's presence among them, and the wonderful promises of God's blessing, and simply burying them in the ground. The scribes and the Pharisees wanted religion without change. They wanted religion without risk. They presumed to trade with the responsibilities that God had given them. Have we been guilty of burying the treasure that our war dead fought for? Or are we using it to ensure that life is better for the poor and the weak? As we honour our war dead today, let's take this moment, this Remembrance Sunday 2020, even though it's different to any other Remembrance Sunday that we have experienced, to pledge ourselves again, to use the freedom that they fought for, to live up to the responsibilities that God has given us. Let's use it to make known the gospel of the kingdom in all that we do, in all that we say, in all that we are. Let's use it to remind ourselves to be good stewards of God's world and its resources. Let's use it to remind ourselves to care for others as Jesus would. That will be the very best way to honour those who fought for our freedom and whom we remember today. God bless you.